Hello and welcome, everyone. We're so pleased to have you here with us for our third in our series about habits that keep you stuck. Today, we're talking about the consistency illusion. And so, again, I just want to reiterate, as always, that at Expanding You, we really believe in the power of community. And we know that a strong community can change the world. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to raise the vibration, bring people together, and hopefully support you in opening your mind, your heart, and moving forward in your life. So, as we dive into this topic of consistency, I'd love to know, raise your hand if you take pride in being consistent, right? And why? Why do we take pride in being consistent, right? I know for me, it's about honoring myself, actually. I take real pride in being consistent when I'm doing those things that I know help me feel better about myself and feel like I'm moving forward. Yeah, for sure. What else feels good about
I
consistency?
I guess how look at consistency is, oh God, the word just went right out of my head. Um, discipline,
Mm,
discipline. So I look at it as being disciplined. If I'm going to make a commitment to meditate every day, I do. And if my time is scrunched, then I do a short meditation. But I do something to go within to make that connection before I really get up and start my day.
yeah,
Yeah.
That's
sounds
fabulous.
like a great way. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm more to the I have good consistency in certain areas or contexts of my life, and I have a high freedom need. So I don't do so well with routine, but I do well with consistency, which we'll get more into this talk.
You don't do so well with what? What did you say?
Routine,
Routine.
really rigidness doesn't work well for me, but I can still do consistency.
Right.
Yeah. And okay, so then what if we could benefit from being more consistent? What would that be about? Like where would more consistency help us in our lives? I mean, I think right away about sort of what Patricia was naming, right? There's certain things that I would love to be more consistent with because I know that consistency is really habit forming, right? Where I can move myself from that conscious effort into more of that unconscious habit, right? A positive habit.
Yeah, I agree. I think consistency is primarily for me is best when I'm building a skill or I'm working towards a goal. All of those things that might take a lot of little steps, and then consistency is required for me for sure.
So how do you two define consistency?
Great question. Consistency would be about taking the same action or the same steps with with a regular at regular intervals, right? So I have a daily practice, or maybe I'm consistently responding the same way to certain scenarios, right? I know, like, if we think about inner balance tools, it's like if I catch myself thinking a negative thought, I don't necessarily know the frequency that's going to happen, but I can say I consistently respond by looking for that neutral fact before I go to the positive.
Well, you said taking the same action and steps and on a regular basis.
Yeah,
Was that the word, the last word, basis?
it was. Yeah.
Well, and we're going to go beyond that today, is we're going to look at basically what type of consistency or where consistency is coming from. So it is those, as you would say, regular steps, but this has to be in alignment with what matters most or what creates growth. And so that's what we're going to look into today, because consistency is not always a good thing.
And therein lies the illusion. So the illusion around consistency is that, many of us hold this belief, if I'm consistent, that's a good thing and it's going to deliver whatever results I'm looking for. And we know that that's not necessarily true.
Well, I have a very good
It'll
example.
deliver the results as a result of whatever you're consistent about.
Yeah, that's
We
right.
have to be, I mean, it can be, yeah. I mean, that's also about manifestation. We're all manifesting our reality all the time, right? But it doesn't mean, even though when we try to be focused on the positive, it doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen because if we're if we're not paying attention to our thoughts, we're manifesting anyway, and we're going to manifest what we don't want. And then we feel like a victim of it, right?
Absolutely.
Well, I think about you hear them say if you do 10,000 hours of something, you'll become a master or masterful at it. And this is a great example where, you can be practicing the wrong thing for 10,000 hours and you will not become masterful at the thing you're trying to do. So there is some sort of self-awareness and self-evaluation and check-in to see if you're on point.
Absolutely.
So this reminds me of when I was 20 and I was married, and I was always focused on getting ahead, and being a good provider for the family. And so for me, that meant a lot of like working hard, and I was really consistent. I had my work ethic was like relentless. My schedule was packed, and I had this unquestionable drive. And for me, it was like on the surface, that's working. I am getting ahead financially. I learned this growing up from my parents who are entrepreneurs, workaholics, and this is how we provide. We create financial success for stability. And so I was really consistent. But that consistency was actually coming from fear and comfort zone, fear of failing, fear of not being a good provider, fear of letting down my family or anything like that. And
Yeah.
so I definitely showed up every day doing the grind, but it was because I was feeling like unsafe or unvalued in some way, and I had to prove myself to the family, to the world. And so, like you said, Leslie, the illusion here is my consistency is going to create success. My success is going to create fulfillment, and that's going to create a great family. Well, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. Yes, I was a
Well,
good provider. Yes, I created a lot of financial success, but my consistency did not create a great family life.
because it came out of fear.
Yeah, it's coming out of fear, it's coming out of old programming and limiting beliefs, just
Mhm.
doing what was familiar to me, what I'd learned growing up, like, and so I wasn't really aligned with what really mattered to me or the purpose, although it was more of a surface thing. I thought I was, and in
Mhm.
hindsight, it's obvious I wasn't.
Well, I have a perfect example of consistency in the negative.
Hmm.
Being late. I have been consistently up until recently in my life and working with Lynn because that was one of the things I worked on with Prime Potential was being that she had me going. She told me I had to show up 10 minutes early for everything. I didn't do well with that. I when I when I did my best to show up 10 minutes early, actually I was on time. And it became like a joke at my Toastmasters group. I have a wonderful Toastmasters group, and I go every Wednesday from 12:30 to 1:30. And I was always racing to beat the clock. And no matter whether I left early, if I would leave early, I would hit a traffic jam, or I would have something holding me back, or I would forget my phone and have to go back. So being late has, unfortunately, and I'm really embarrassed to say this, but my whole life, that's what people have associated with me is being late. Not a half an hour late or 20 minutes late, but usually between 5 and 10 minutes late. And of course, that was all coming from shame, and uh, just feeling it was behind it was all my shit.
Mhm.
Behind it, because as soon as I would walk into a room late, I would feel ashamed. I would feel embarrassed. And finally, I did a Toastmasters talk on it and I just brought it out.
It's amazing what happens when we bring things into the light, right? Name it to tame it, right?
And now I'm on time. Now I'm on time. And, they used to be when I would come in after I made that announcement, they would applaud when I came in the room. Now they don't applaud anymore, which is a good thing because
That's
yeah, because now I'm making it a habit. Am I absolutely on time for every single thing in my life? No, but it's a process and I'm aware of it, and I pay attention to the clock much more. And I also, yeah, I just had this attitude about time that I had plenty of time, but I didn't have plenty of time. I would look at the clock and think I had plenty of time,
yeah.
but but I didn't. And then I would stress me out. And of course, when you're running late, you get stressed out.
Well, this is such a great example of consistency that's coming from the comfort, familiar, or fear zone. And I've seen this with clients who are like multitaskers. And so they're late all the time, and people expect they're going to be late. But why are they late? Usually they're like, oh, one more thing's got to get done, or I have to get this sort of thing done. And oh, look at the clock. Oh, yeah, I got time to do that. And so the fear of not getting something done or the fear of forgetting something, so they do it in the moment, all of that winds up making them
Yeah,
consistently
that
late.
was a part of my issue, but mostly is that I didn't have really a good relationship with time.
Yeah.
I didn't have a good relationship with time.
Yeah, that's it. And so you would have learned that somewhere in your past.
Yeah, well, uh, uh, with the molestation in my youth, when I was very young, like 6, uh, I think it goes back to not enough, just not feeling that I was good enough, a good girl, all of that. And so this is my own theory about it. When I look at my life, I've had not, I would see myself as not enough time, not enough money, and not enough love. Those were the themes until I was able to really distinguish what was behind it.
Well, let's play with this. We're going to look at where's your consistency coming from. And I'm going to pull up a PowerPoint in a moment. But really, what we're looking at is your consistency. Is this something that's helping you create what you really want in life? Are you going beneath the surface to what's really most important? And is it aligned with like your purpose? Is there a conscious intention here? So you can see the one that you have there is not matching. And we're going to go into where that might be coming from in that PowerPoint right here
Yep.
of this very cool image we have of the different zones. And so, what does consistency look like in each of these zones? So, we start with the comfort zone. Here, consistency is focused on safety and familiarity, strategies based on control, lack of flexibility, restrictiveness, habitual. This is very the most habitual zone. There's very little curiosity or openness. There's a sense of just going through the motions. And so a word that would encapsulate this zone would be the autopilot. And you can see with my example, when I was in my 20s, that I was doing all of these things. I wasn't flexible. I was just doing what was familiar. I was doing what was habitual. And I just stayed in that autopilot. And some of that would be happening, I guess, for you as well around being late. Your example around late. There's some habitual pieces that are running. And so the next zone is the fear zone. What does consistency look like when you're in the fear zone? This is where perfectionism comes in,
Yep.
right? This is attention to detail and planning. This is anticipating problems. And from the fear zone, any change or anything unfamiliar can be perceived as a threat. And this zone is like a transitory zone where it's really hard on the nervous system. And so we can move up from the comfort zone, hit the fear zone, and then either de-evolve back to the comfort zone or find enough courage to move into the learning zone. So we typically don't stay locked in the fear zone for long periods of time. And so the other big challenge in the fear zone is there's a ton of external focus. So we really worry about the opinions of others are being validated by others. And so that helps us shrink, stay small. And a word that would encapsulate this zone is hypervigilance.
Which I think is really valuable to note that hypervigilance in and of itself, this is a state of dysregulation. And when we're dysregulated, our brain isn't engaged, right? Our brain has flipped into survival mode. It's not in creative mode, problem solving mode, solution mode, right? That doesn't happen in this zone. So we can see right by the nature of being afraid and therefore dysregulated, we're not going to be coming from a productive place, typically speaking.
Yeah,
May I ask a question?
please.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, Control the comfort zone. I think based on my experience that the control and the safety, the comfort zone is also based in fear. Because when we try to control a situation, underneath that is fear that if we let go of control, something bad is going to happen. So I'm of the belief that fear is the boogeyman for everything, for
Hmm.
all of our challenges. So fear also for me is in the comfort zone.
I
Absolutely, and fear is keeping you in the comfort zone is right. It's
Yeah.
true. And any behaviors that are limiting us is underpinned by fear in some way. I agree.
Yeah.
mhm, absolutely.
Okay, and so we move into what does consistency look like in the learning zone? Oh, by the way, I want to say, unless you were talking about the regulation, and this is just like what we teach in inner balance. So the comfort zone, the fear zone, a lot of that will be the out when you're out of balance. And we
Yeah.
teach in inner balance how to move into the learning growth zone through different skills and strategies.
Yeah.
So in the learning zone, what does consistency look like? Here, you're open to new information. Curiosity takes the lead. There's a willingness to try new things, to try on new tools and skills. In this zone, you're willing to make mistakes and see them as opportunities for growth. You're open to feedback in some way. This level, though, has some real catches. Like this is a real bit of experience for me. There can be a naiveness in the learning zone as far as like getting a lot of information, maybe even having some experiences, but not really grounded in them, not fully understanding them. This was a challenge for me when I first was in personal development and I was learning about ownership or accountability. And with a little bit of learning, I thought, oh, yeah, I totally got that. I do that in my life. And I looked for one or two examples where I was great at it. And that stopped me. And a little while later, a couple of years later, when I looked deeply, I realized I'm not doing well at this in many areas of my life. But I tricked myself in finding one or two areas where I was successful and just thought, check mark, I got that. And so that can happen. There's those traps that happen in the learning zone. Another one that was a real hook for me, and I can still get caught in at times, is gathering too much information or information that's too advanced. And so, being a ferocious learner, I like to find out what's out there and find other information that links to something else I've heard. And all of that can be enticing and addictive because it feels kind of empowering to learn new stuff. But if I'm not actually implementing it well, I'm not going to move into the growth zone. And another challenge here is getting information that's too advanced. And so if I'm learning information that's accurate and true, but way advanced for where I am, I'm not able to implement it properly. And it can create blind spots and or even bypassing. And so this area, this zone, we would encapsulate it with experimental.
Mhm,
Now, all of these the three zones kind of have a habitualness to them. The comfort zone is the most habitual, and there's a little bit of habit in the fear, there's a little bit of habit that can happen in the learning zone. But when we get into the growth zone, consistency here is the most aware or the most conscious, the least habitual, I would say. And so consistency in this zone is purpose driven. We're living from intention. We have integrity and alignment with what's most important in our lives, what we value the most. In this zone, we practice skills, we live the tools, and we integrate those learnings. Now, at this point, we use feedback for course correction, we use it for self reflection. And so we have a high level of self responsibility, deep ownership, healthy self evaluation. That it's important to be able to tune in to see how am I doing with that tool or that skill? Is that really working? What's not working? How to adjust? The growth zone also has more of acceptance and gets rid of right and wrong thinking, which would be found maybe in some of the earlier zones. And it requires a level of humbleness to say, I know what I know and I know what I don't know, and that's okay. The word that would encapsulate this zone would be clarity, knowing what really matters most and then aligning with that. So when you hear us say alignment, that's what we're looking at. We're aligning at all these big pieces.
mhm. And this is where, excuse me, Patricia, where your example of, your meditation that you are very consistent with, that's clearly coming from this growth zone because it is something that you're doing out of alignment with who you are, how you want to show up in the world, your beliefs, right? What's most important to you. So you can see how it takes on this flavor of growth. And you even said you demonstrated already some of these elements of like that humility of sometimes I don't have the same amount of time and I just do what I can, right? I something is good enough, right? Which is a really beautiful example of consistency in this growth zone.
Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. The other piece I want to highlight here is notice that all the zones had some positive and negative in it. There is some benefit of the zones. That's also why we stay in them. But the illusion is that if I'm consistent, I'm going to be growing or I'm going to be aligned with what matters most in my life, what's most important or on purpose, on point. And that is not necessarily true. In fact, when we're back in the comfort fear zone, especially, we'll see that a lot of that consistency is coming from familiarity, old programming, limiting beliefs, or maybe even emotional wounds from the past.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if we sort of take a more practical example to sort of feel into each of those zones, I love using the example of going to the gym because this is a really perfect way to highlight the different flavors, right? So I'm sure for those of you who go to the gym, I'm sure you've seen this person, right? Comes to the gym and maybe hops on the treadmill, just kind of like a meandering pace. They're maybe scrolling on their phone, right? Just sort of like mindlessly going through it, not really engaged in the process, hop off and head home, right? I've checked the box. I've done the thing. Yeah, I work out 3 times a week, right? Now, if I'm in the fear zone, there might still be fear in the comfort zone, right? Like, oh, I don't want to push myself or I don't want to look stupid, right? Many things can keep me in the comfort zone that are fear related. But in the fear zone, we're kind of amping that up a bit, right? You can imagine now I'm the person like, okay, I know I want to build this habit. I want to be consistent with going to the gym. I want to do it right. So I'm going to research. I'm going to create a really tight plan. I'm going to be very rigid about it. I'll get really hard on myself if I miss a session, right? And the element of insecurity is playing a really big role here. And so I'm also really concerned maybe about how other people are viewing me. So again, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing it right. So it looks productive, right? More so than the comfort zone gym goer, right? However, my nervous system is definitely in some version of hypervigilance, right? I'm like one misstep away from giving up or hurting myself even. And and while I'm at the gym, I mean that first person in the comfort zone, again, there's that robotic element, right? Just going through the motions. Here, I'm going to feel a level of anxiety or tension in my body. There'll be an element of pressure and concern, right? So that doesn't sound like fun to me. Now, if I'm moving into this learning zone, well, again, here there's more of that openness, that willingness to try new things. So maybe I'm experimenting with group classes and trying on some new form of exercise, looking for something that feels more alive or invigorating, right? I might ask questions, get feedback, that sort of thing. And here I'm maybe building new skills, but this is again where if I'm not careful, I might not know what I don't know, right? I might fall into the traps of doing something over and over again that isn't healthy for my body, right? Because I suddenly think I'm an expert, but maybe I'm not quite yet, right? And I can also be a little bit uncertain still, but I'm excited, I'm engaged. Now, when I move into that growth zone, this is where I'm really in tune with what my goals are, right? What does my body, my mind, my soul need out of this? And I'm tailoring what I do to match that. I'm also more in tune. So I'm gauging where I'm at and I'm recognizing where it's time to maybe up the weights or up my reps, right? I'm going to continue reevaluating and reassessing where I'm at so that I'm shifting as I go, right? And I'm not necessarily measuring my success by how much weight or how many reps. I'm measuring it by how I walk away feeling, right? And I think is another great example, just linking to Patricia's example of, this is the place where maybe I don't have the same amount of energy today. So I'm not going to beat myself up if I do a lighter workout. I'm honoring my body. I'm honoring where I'm at in my growth. And sometimes growth is two steps forward and one back, right? So again, very different energetics to each of these zones. They all, like Jeff pointed out, they all have their pros. Many of them have some cautionary tales, as I like to say, right? But they have a very different energetic stamp, each one of them, right?
Well, that example is really good. Unless it reminds me of the presence continuum we use, going from autopilot up to presence, and I can see how that maps over really well from comfort zone to growth. Because to be in the growth zone, it is conscious, present, aware. If I'm using the gym example, is this weight that I'm using today actually still building the muscle, or engaging the muscles well enough? Maybe it's time to step up or not. Or like you say, maybe I've worked out too many times this week and it's actually I haven't had enough rest in between. If I'm present enough, I'll know then that's not helping me grow. I'm pushing myself and I actually need to take a break. So you can see where being very consciously aware of yourself or what you're doing is a big difference.
To me, it all comes down to presence. Every single one of the zones, it really all comes down to being present in
Mhm.
any area of life, whether it's consistency or integrity or, whatever the issue is. And presence is the challenge because the material world's very seductive. It, it really, it really it gives us too many options, you know,
Yeah.
being present.
Well, and I think that's a great point to make, Patricia, especially as we're going to move into sort of how do we assess where we're coming from with our consistency. But I think that would be a, a great starting point anywhere along the road, right? Is where is my level of presence, right? Because I think presence is the thing that's going to support me in moving from any one, especially of those lower places, into more of the learning and growth zones, right? Is just becoming present with what is, right? Becoming present with, oh my gosh, there's fear in my system. That's not supporting me, right? Becoming present to the fact like, wow, I don't know why I'm doing this thing that I'm doing over and over again, right? Presence really is the, I want to say, the antidote almost to the comfort and fear zones.
It's the antidote to everything in my life.
Agreed.
Well, I like this too because it's a matter of like tuning in to become present. So lots of times we're not present. That means we're running an autopilot, as we said, or we're in blind spots and we're not aware. And so one of the ways to tune into ourselves is to ask questions. That engages the mind, it can engage the heart, and it's self-exploration. And so that's literally where we're going to go next, is asking the right questions to find out where your consistency is coming from and what's motivating it. So the first question, am I hoping this what am I hoping this consistency will give me? And then so in our work, we'd look at that as I'm trying to get love, am I trying to get safety, am I trying to get approval, control, freedom, is aligning with purpose. These are great reflective questions to see. And by the way, there's a worksheet that goes with this, just like with all of our table talks. And these questions are all mapped out on it. So you can explore areas in your life where you're consistent to see if it's actually helping you grow or not, or if it's actually aligning with your values and purpose. Another question, what do I fear would happen if I stopped this behavior? So would I feel lost? Would I feel irresponsible? Would I feel guilty or unworthy? Is this consistency energizing or depleting? I think this is really great. This is a very good check-in. Does it light me up? Or am I dragging myself through it? Leslie being an expert in the somatic work, I'm sure this is the perfect one to tune in to become present with my body and just see. Because I know when I'm consistently doing things that are from those lower zones, it's very depleting. And am I doing this out of love and alignment, or am I doing this out of fear and obligation? That's a very telling question. And so be really honest with ourselves. Where am I coming from? And
Yeah. I think it's, I think, well, so this is, how do we self-assess? This is step one, right? Asking these questions. And, just to link back to what we were saying before around presence, presence is about being, when I am present, I am often regulated, right? Presence is this place where I am not in conflict with reality. I am acknowledging, I am accepting, I am embracing what is true in this moment, and I am present with it. And so asking myself questions is a really great way, a really great tool to utilize to come into presence. And and that's really has to do with how our brain is wired, right? We actually have an answering reflex. So just like, the doctor taps you on the knee with his little hammer and next thing you know, your foot comes out whether you want it to or not. Similarly, when we ask a question or someone asks a question of us, our brain hates blank space, right? It wants an answer. It wants to fill in the blank. So even if it's a rhetorical question and we know nobody's looking for an answer, you better believe our brain is going to start finding one, right? And that simple act of our brain looking for answers immediately creates a higher level of regulation in my nervous system. And so, step two in assessing the source of our consistency is really about tuning into that nervous system and recognizing the signs of each zone. So, when I'm in that comfort zone, feelings of comfort, right? I often, when I'm thinking comfort zone, the, I often think of like a heart rate monitor. And in the comfort zone, my heart rate would be um, that of an alive person, right? It would be meh. There's not a lot of excitement or juice here, right? This is dull, bored, flat. There's not a lot of much feeling, right? Now, when we move into the fear zone, we start to get more activation in our nervous system. So there are more feelings, things like tension in the body, that feeling of anxiousness that we often experience down low in our bellies, right? That controlled sort of feeling and the sense of being hyper vigilant, wondering what's coming next. Where should I be paying attention? When I'm in this learning zone, now there's some of this excitement, right? Some nervous excitement. What's next? And that brings this sense of aliveness, right? My pulse is really moving here. And there's this willingness, this openness and curiosity that's happening in my system, right? A lot of questions in the growth zone, we move out of this higher sort of buzz kind of energy and we fall into a more powerful, a higher vibration, but it's more grounded, right? There's this sense of clarity and calm that comes with the growth zone, right? And often we're feeling that sense of fulfillment here, right? So this is a great way is to just check in with your body, right? Your body is going to give you these cues and help you understand which one of those zones you're currently operating from, right?
so good. And it does tie back into presence, right? To check in with the body, you've got to be present. Otherwise, you're
Exactly.
just running in the loops of the mind.
And when you're present, even if you're present to something negative, at least you have uh, the foundation, if you will, of being present. So that you're not, you're not out to lunch.
Hmm.
You're in the moment saying, this is not working, or I'm present to this problem, or whatever. Presence still gives us that sense of alignment.
And empowerment, right? Because as soon as I'm present with, okay, there's a problem here, well, now I have the power to choose what to do about it. When
That,
I'm when I'm oblivious to the problem, I have no power. There is nothing I can do because I don't have the awareness to do it, right?
that all comes back to that choice. But the choice, before you can make a choice, you have to be present
That's right.
to what choice
Exactly.
you want to make. Yeah.
And so what we're sharing here today is that consistency itself is not really the goal. The goal is actually, are you in alignment with purpose, with your values, with what's most important in life? Are you creating the life you want, or being the person you want to be? And so that's where this next question would come in. Is this consistency helping me become who I truly want to be? That's a big overarching question that would help you in many areas or contexts of your life. If I look back at my example when I was sharing when I was 20, was my consistency and my working and my drivenness creating me to be the father I wanted to be the husband I wanted to be? Absolutely not. And so if it's not, and we can realize these things, like you say, we become present to that, we become aware, and then it's like, okay, well, then what would I like to do? How would I like to change? And what would help me move into the learning zone, or what would help me move up into the growth zone?
Mhm. Yeah.
And so I'd offer that to everyone to think about areas in your life where you've been very consistent. And now through listening to this talk, you realize, oh, my consistency actually was coming from fear zone, comfort zone, or maybe my old programming or my limiting beliefs. And it's actually not helping me grow or become the person I want to be.
And this is where, w- sorry, what was that, Patricia?
That's very big awareness.
It really is. And this is where I have the opportunity to reframe success for myself, right? Jeff now has this clarity to say, yeah, the workaholic pattern, being really consistent with work doesn't necessarily create the relationship results that I want in my life. And that's the success that I'm more aligned with, right? So that's what I'm going to build my consistency in. And very often, like we've been talking about quite a bit, right? Very often we just get into a habit, right? We just do the things we've always done because we haven't stopped to become present with them and to ask ourselves the question. And so that's really, it was really interesting creating this table talk because, we started long ago with the idea of what are some of these habits that we just kind of blindly fall into and we think they're helping us, but they're actually a hindrance. And, when we started writing this particular table talk, we thought, oh man, why did we choose this? but but as soon as we started to really pull it apart and see and understand for ourselves that yes, this is where consistency becomes a trap when we're not clear on why and how and what it is that we're working towards. So I really encourage each one of you watching this to take the time to go through the worksheet and to really take a look at the things that you're being consistent with. And take the time to reflect so that you can ensure, I mean, we don't have infinite time, energy, and money. So let's make sure that we're spending those times and the time, the energy, the money on things that really are enriching our life and bringing us closer to who we want to be and how we want to show up in the world. And that's really what this is all about. Being the person that I want to be so I can live the life that I want to be living.
So true, Leslie. Well said. I think too, if I reflect back to myself in my 20s, I was sure I was on point. And in hindsight now, it's so obvious that I was had a surface thing I was chasing that had just been learned programming or what was familiar to the way I grew up, not realizing in all of that, working three jobs, being a workaholic, I'm not mentally, emotionally present for my family. I'm not creating a great family. I'm not doing a good job as a father, and I'm not doing a good job as a husband. I'm not there. And when I am there, I'm burnt out. That is not the picture of what I was seeing in my mind of having a family meant. And when we're lost in it, like I was, I didn't know. It would have been wonderful to have somebody give me this talk, or somebody sit down and say, well, let's look at what you're doing. And is it really creating the deeper, real, most important want, the real thing? And it would have been clear at some point, I think, if I'd have been open enough to hear. If I slowed down enough and took a day off work to hear, it would have landed. And it would have been a major shift, a major aha moment, which could really change the trajectory of my life at that point.
So, Jeff, I share with you the workaholism thing. I was a workaholic.
Mhm.
And I went to Workaholics Anonymous every Tuesday. And there were only 7 of us in the group. because everyone else, of course, was working. But very quickly, what happened with me is that I started to become aware that I was always creating my reality. And I was going to Workaholics Anonymous saying I'm a workaholic in recovery all the time. I'm a workaholic and because I was confirming the fact that I was a workaholic and that I would, I was never going to be able to get out of that. So I went to the head of the class and I said, I can't come anymore because I realized that what I'm saying here is not really what I want. I don't want to be confirming that I'm a workaholic. I want to make a choice to move past it. And he said to me, please don't tell the others.
Right?
But you know what I did? I told them. I had to tell them. How could I do that? I could be out of integrity with myself not to tell them. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's a little bit aside what you were talking about, but workaholism is, not, it's not being present. It's not allowing yourself to feel your feelings. It's using something and moving into an addiction around something because you don't want to deal with what your emotions are. It was part of my coping mechanism growing up.
So true. Mine too, for sure. And I love what you're saying here, to identify as the workaholic and then even go to support groups on it. You're now creating consistency around that that's keeping you stuck. And
Exactly.
years ago I had a friend who had been in AA for 7 years. He'd been clean for 7 years, and him and I were on a vacation together, and he kept saying, just in regular conversation, he kept saying, as an alcoholic and da 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 da. And then he'd tell me how stuck he is in his life, and I'd be like, you know, you haven't drank alcohol in more than 7 years. I don't know how you can keep saying you're an alcoholic. Wouldn't an alcoholic drink? And he got really offended because he didn't want me to, he thought it was taking it like I was dismissing the past and saying he should drink. And I was like, I'm not saying you should drink. I'm not dismissing the past. But you're also now caught yourself in a loop of saying I'm an alcoholic, and it's keeping you stuck from actually expanding into a greater potential. And the conversation didn't go well. But a year later, him and I talked again, and he said, "Thank you for that. I was so caught, and I wanted to fight to be right about that, and I realized it was holding me back totally. I'm not going to drink. I'm not saying I should drink, but I'm also not an alcoholic in that regard. But how his mind had locked it in."
That's the problem I have with the whole AA program. I think that there needs to be a 13th step. And that 13th step is presence to the truth of who we are and that we're creating our reality with our thinking.
Mhm.
And to be continually saying I'm whatever in recovery, it just reinforces it in our subconscious and we never really get past it. So
Yeah, that's a great point, Patricia. And it really aligns to our work around identity and how the identity will either help you break free or keep you stuck. And so to not identify as an alcoholic, but still not drink, great. You can now expand your horizons.
it comes down to choice, doesn't it? Always comes down to choice.
Yeah.
Sure does.
Yes.
Pain would be
Absolutely.
cheering here. Glasser.
Yeah. The choice theory community would love that. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
Well, I hope this has been super supportive. I know that as I was sort of alluding to, I don't know if I actually said it, but I know that the creation of this talk was actually really supportive for us as well and gave us so much clarity. And you can see clarity around lots more than just consistency. So hopefully it does the same for everyone who watches this talk. Of course, we always welcome your feedback, suggestions on topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Important to note that uh, we like to honor balance in life. And so, with that in mind, we will not be doing a table talk in July and August. We will be shifting our focus to more exciting things that are coming in the fall and also making some room for fun and play. So, hopefully, everyone else does that as well. And we will be back in September. So if you've got a hot topic you'd like us to cover in September, make sure to let us know. And you can email us at hello@expandingyou.com. And thank you so much for
Great.
being with us.
Thank you both, Leslie and Jeff. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for being with us, Patricia.
Yeah, thank you. This is a great topic. I really enjoyed it too.
Great.
All right, bye for now.
Bye for now.